Yeah, the Anthony worksheet. Yeah. Funny story about that. Whatever you have is fine. I'll take whatever you got from it. I actually posted that in the wrong class, and I'm teaching a 210 class, so you can imagine they're being very polite, but they're what is that case? Where do we find the Anthony case? Well, you got to go through about 6 more courses before you get to it. But anyway, yeah, so I accidentally posted that in the wrong class. But yeah, whatever you have and turn in is fine. Yeah, so that's the Anthony thing from last week. If you just jotted something down, just take a picture of it and send it in. But yeah, I'll give you credit for it. And again, I made the due date a week later. It originally was in the 210 class, it was due tomorrow, but I made it due a week later because actually I didn't have it up there for a week. So yeah, apologies on that. I had to apologize to 2 classes on that. Scaring my 210 students and then irritating my 330 students. Busy day, busy day. Okay, so today we're going to start with the sampling practice exam. And the first thing we're going to start out with are the tested controls. And you recall that these are yes, no tests. And something called sampling for attributes. So these are yes, no tests. And sampling for attributes. Yes, no, they either, for instance, this first one we're going to do a signature on purchase order. The department manager signed all purchase orders. It's either yes or no. So you take a sample of purchase orders, they either have the manager's signature or they don't. It's yes or no. There are no dollar amounts for tested controls. You're simply testing whether they have the controls in place that you can rely on. And I don't think I put it in. I should probably put it in here. Well, what's the objective of the internal controls, of testing controls? Let's make this into a sentence. So the objective of the tested controls is the verify the auditor can rely on the client's internal controls. Now, you only have to do this if you are going to rely on the internal controls. If you're not going to rely on the internal controls, you do not have to do the tested controls. So the tested controls are to see if you can rely on those tested controls. And if you can, then you can reduce your substantive testing, the testing for dollars. and basically, if you're auditing a non-publicly traded company or doing it according to the AICPA rules, you'd only do it if you think it would be more efficient. You know, if it'd be more efficient to be able to rely on the internal controls. You're required to get an understanding. Let me write this. I think I may have gotten off track here a little bit, but okay. So understanding of internal controls, this is required. On any audit, you must get an understanding of internal controls. Why? Because that's the only way you can really figure out where the problems might be. You know, you have to understand the internal controls. Now, if you're going to rely on them, so this is just getting an understanding, but if you're going to rely on them, you're going to say, okay, we want to see if these controls are good enough that we can actually do some of our other testing because they have these controls in place that are really good. Oh, I should have known that was going to happen. That's only required if you're going to rely on the internal controls. And so, you know, and so you say, well, why would you do that? Well, it's probably more efficient. It's cheaper. If it would cost, you know, $20,000 to test for the internal controls, and if you don't test the internal controls, cost $25,000. Say, well, let's test the internal controls. So we can rely on them. They'll save us $5,000. So testing the internal controls for financial audit, it's optional. Unless you're going to rely on the internal controls, then it's required. But you do not have to rely on internal controls. You get to say, okay, I'm just going to forget about the internal controls. I'm just going to sample, you know, do substantive testing. Okay, so here we have this rule. All requires that a department manager sign all purchase orders. So all purchase orders, and you know, whatever the department is, marketing department, manufacturing, shipping, whatever it is, that you have to have a department manager sign off on all purchase orders. And I guess the idea is that you have someone in management responsible for any purchase order that is made. Okay. You got to take a sample of 300 orders. The auditor allows for an error rate of 6%. The assess level of control risk, and this is the risk that controls will miss catching a material misstatement. And so, you know, so if there's a material misstatement on those purchase orders, and you know, that would be caught by a department manager, that would be a problem. And the allowance for sampling risk, this is sort of like the standard deviation for this kind of testing, is 3%. So whatever we come up with for our error rate, it might be worse by up to 3%. There are ways to calculate that. By the way I'm showing you these sampling stuff, is the way you'll see it on the CPA exam. I've never seen them ask you to calculate this. You know, I've never seen them tell you to pull out the tables and figure that out. But they usually just give this to you. So whatever error rate you come up with. Okay, so in the following order, they'll take the 300 purchase orders, and 285 of them had signatures, and 15 of them did not. So what is the error rate of the test of controls? You can either blur out the answer or put it into chat. Use me.
Is it 6%?
I think less.
Is it 5%?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So the orders without signatures was 15. I'm gonna you see me craning my neck around this. I'm trying to see past the camera. Okay, so this would be that, and total orders in the sample was 300. And so we'll okay, so what was the error? 0.05, or another way to say it, same thing, is 5%. Okay, so here is what is happening with it. Let me switch cameras here. Focus, dog. All right, so it's sort of like this. And so here's our sample. And this will be a little bit exaggerated, but they have so it came out that 5% was the error rate. Now, there's also that there's also that allowance for sampling risk of 3%. So that's sort of like it's sort of like our bell curve, you know, going like that. So this is another 3%. So this, you know, according to our sample, this could be off by up to 8%. Now, depending on how you do the sampling, it's possible it could go this other way, but this wasn't going to be the problem. And then, so they tell us that there's probably no way for me to do this without making a mess, but yeah. So 6% is, you know, in here somewhere. So this is our cutoff, 6%. So the question is, are we going to accept these results and rely on the internal controls? So this is what our error rate was. We found our error rate, and that's our best estimate of the error rate. But remember, this is a sample. So it's possible whatever the precision we're looking for is, that this is off by up to 8%. So what do you think? Are we going to, are we going to rely on the controls over the authorization of the purchase orders? Yes or no? Actually, we're not. And the reason we're not going to do it is because it could be, according to our sample, it could be off by as much as 8%. Even though this is our best estimate, we could be off by up to 8% based on our sample. So if we need a 6% to rely on the internal controls, we can't do it. Now, what might we do? We might be able to get a bigger sample, and a bigger sample will kind of narrow that in. It kind of narrow that in. So it is possible, and maybe even move it to the right or whatever. But for the sample that's given, we can't rely on it because it could be up to 8% error rate in there for whatever, at 95% level or 90% level or whatever it is. Okay, so here. Yeah, I thought I had to say this. Maximum error rate. So the upper limit, 8%. Why? Because the now there's something kind of a little bit weird, and I think I talked about this. Maybe not recently, but I think this is kind of like coin flips. So you're not going to have a real standard, a normal what we call standard deviation, but it's a it's a formula that approximates what would happen in a binomial distribution. So it's using the normal distribution on something that's really not what you normally think of as a normal distribution. This is a binomial distribution. It's 0 or 1. So that kind of thing. But I think we talked about this, that you get a coin flip, do 2 coin flips. That's heads. It's tails, heads. That's tails. Tails, tails. This thing, it looked like. So that's kind of what this is. So this is sort of like the standard deviation. Yeah, how many standard deviations away from the middle of the market. Okay, so no. There's other ways to show this. You may see it's done other ways. Sometimes they'll take the, you see them take the 6% and they'll minus the 3 and then compare that to the actual. It's all the same. It's basically the same idea. I think I like seeing it this way just because this looks like more like normal standard sampling kind of stuff, whereas you have your best estimate, but then you have some allowance for standard deviation, or in this case, for sampling risk, of 3%. Okay, what was the misstatement of the purchases? Unknown. One thing about test of controls is that, even if there is a serious problem with internal controls, it does not necessarily mean the financial statements are misstated. It's possible that you have a problem with internal controls. However, that doesn't mean that there actually is a problem with it. So, for instance, the department managers didn't sign off on 3% of the, or no, 5% of the purchase orders. It doesn't necessarily mean that those purchase orders were done in error or were some kind of fraud or anything like that. It just means that the control of having department managers sign purchase orders was not being followed, or not being followed to the extent that you can rely on the internal controls. It does not mean the financial statements are misstated. So you can actually have a material internal control weakness. It's material, it's big. And the financial statements can be perfectly fine. They can be not be materially misstated at all. So another kind of strange thing about doing the test of controls is if you find a real problem, it might not be a real problem for the financial statements. Obviously, this is something that you report to the management, the board of directors, but the financial statements might be fine. So that's one of those kind of things you got to keep in mind when you're doing testing controls. It's different than if you're doing the test of substantive testing for dollars. If the dollars, if they're materially misstated, well, then it's material misstated. But in testing controls, something could be not be able to be relied upon, and financial statements can still be fine. Okay. So we can't rely on the internal controls. And we had planned on a substantive test of 500 items, and that was assuming that we could rely on the internal controls, right? I mean, that you would, if you're testing internal controls, that means you have the expectation that you can rely on them. If you don't think you can rely on the internal controls, there probably isn't a reason to test them. You're not going to spend the time testing them if you don't believe that you can rely on them anyways. So the test of 500 items is probably there to, if they could rely on the internal controls. So what would happen to you think, to the summative tests of 500 items if we can't rely on the internal controls? What would we probably have to do? So this is these are testing for the dollar amounts. Oops. So we plan to take 500 items. We find out we can't rely on the internal controls. I'll give you three choices. We could take fewer items. We could take the same amount of items, or we could take more items. So we could take fewer than 500, we could take 500, or we could take more than 500. If we can't rely on the internal controls, what would we probably have to do? Yep. Yeah, we probably have to take more. Now, I mean, how many more? Well, that'd be another judgment call. We probably have to increase the number of items. For example, maybe you take 1,200 items or something. So you increase the number of items you read sampling because you can't rely on the internal controls. So maybe you go up to 1,200 items or something like that. That's just an example. I mean, it's not a you'd probably work out to determine what you're going to need at whatever level of confidence you have to increase that sample size. So if you can't rely on the internal controls, you need to do more of the substantive testing. Now, another thing about the difference between internal control testing and substantive testing is that a lot of times internal control testing is much more involved in that you look for things, for instance, doing purchase orders. I've audited purchase orders several times, and there's probably 20 things you look for. Was the item on an approved list? Was it for the approved price? Was it for the approved vendor? Was it signed off by purchasing department personnel? Was it, were the terms of the agreement printed on the purchase order? There's all these things, all these tests. You may have 30 things that you have to check for on any given purchase order you're testing for internal controls. They can be a lot. Now, the nice thing about substantive testing is you're just looking for one number. What was on the purchase order? Purchase order had $322. Okay, $322. That's it. You can compare that to what they had on their books for that item. But so substantive testing is just one thing. It's one number. Whether it, you wouldn't care whether it was approved or not approved, or approved vendor, not approved vendor. Forget it. Just what's the dollar amount? So substantive testing is basically testing without any control. You're saying, okay, I don't care about the controls. What's the dollar amount? Okay. Does this test require? I already answered that. It's up here. I should move this down. Should have read the handout. Okay. You have to write this down. We already talked about this. So you have to get an understanding of internal controls. Test controls are only relied upon if you're relying on the client internal controls. I'm going to put one more thing here and say that they are for publicly traded company issuers. Hey, that's not how you spell controls. For publicly traded companies, issuers, Tesla controls are required for the audit report on internal controls. So publicly traded companies, they actually have two audit reports, one for the financial statements and one for the internal controls. So if you are doing a publicly traded company, they are required. So if it's not publicly traded, they're only required, I should put that in, non-issuers. So for issuers, you're going to be required for the internal control report. They're not required for your report on the financial statements. Reasonably thinking, though, if you have to do the test on internal controls for the report on internal controls, you may as well try to rely on them for the, the financial audit report, financial statement audit report. Okay, so testing controls are kind of what they say. Just testing the controls. You do not find material misstatements doing tested controls. They're just yes, no tests. So you will not find material misstatements. However, two things. First of all, you can rely on the internal controls. You can reduce your sampling, your substantive testing. Not only that, when you do the test of controls, it's very possible that if there is a problem, it will show you where to look. For instance, if there was 10 things that we were in the test of controls, if there's one that was the real problem, maybe the department manager's not signing off on purchase orders, well, that tells you where to start looking for problems, right? If there's a problem in internal controls, that very well could mean that there's a problem with the dollar amounts. And so, okay, well, we were going to test everything, but I think we're going to focus more on the purchase orders because that seems to be where there's a problem. So, part of the testing of internal controls will also highlight even more than just getting an understanding of the internal controls, where to look for things that could go wrong. Okay, classical sampling. Any questions on that, test controls? By the way, this gets tested quite a bit on the CPA exam, the sampling for attributes, the test controls. For whatever reason, it seems like it gets tested more than these other ones, the dollar amounts. It could just be me seeing the number of different ones they have. But there seems to be quite a bit of questions on these, at least on the reviews there are. And again, that could just be that the substantive testing ones are, a lot of times they'll reuse them. So if they show a classical sampling example that maybe that's been used 5 times, well, they're not going to give you the same question 5 times. Whereas there might be one-offs for many of these. So it'll look like, oh wow, look at how many, look at the number of those. But really, it's just because it's a frequency thing. I don't know if they still do it. When I was taking the exam, it was an open exam, and they used to say, like, how many times this is showing up on the CPA exam. What I mean, it was an open exam. You would take the exam. They give you 2 sheets of paper. One had the exam on it. One was the answer sheet. You'd fill out the answer sheet and turn that in, and that was the only thing you could turn in was the answer sheet. And then you'd take the exam, put it in an envelope with a stamp on it, and they would mail it to you once they got the grade. You'd actually get back the exact test that you had. So a lot of times those CPA questions, you could actually see how many times it was put on the exam. They stopped doing that though, 25 years ago. All right, but here's the thing about though that telling you about this though is that this sampling stuff has not changed. Sampling is still sampling. A lot of the tests are still there. So there actually are real CPA questions, a lot of them that are still relevant. There's floating out there. 1996 was when they had they stopped doing that. but the sampling is not changed. You know, it's the same for 100 years. So there'll still be a lot of actual sampling questions floating around up there. Okay, enough talking. Classical sampling. This is for dollar amounts. And this is what's called sampling for variables. Unlike tested controls that are yes/no tests, sampling for variables, they're variable. So when you pull a purchase order, it might be $100, it might be $101, it might be $102, and so on. And there's a whole huge range of what that purchase order amount could be. So if it's sampling for variables is different than it is, you know, first of all, dollar amounts, but also that it's variable. Something could be up by $1, something could be up by $10,000. You know, there isn't just simply a yes/no thing. Okay. And by the way, this is a lot of times the CPA exam. This is how they'll actually give you the information. This is a format that is quite similar to what they would a lot of times give you. They usually don't have you picking samples. You know, they don't say, okay, pick, you know, use the first 3 digits of the random number table to pick a sample of. You know, they don't do that. They usually say, okay, here's the results, and then they ask you to come up with the answers for them. Okay, so here is our sample. I'll make that yeller. All right, and we have to find the average audit value of the sample and the average book value. And so this is pretty easy. So if the sample size was 1,000, the total audit value of the sample was 50,000. Let's divide them. $50. And you can do the same thing down here. I didn't put it. I left an important thing out. Oopsie daisy. Okay. So I'm gonna do this a little differently, all right? I'm gonna use yellow for that. And I'll use green for this. Okay. So A is what, 50? And B is 48. You guys could probably have done that in your head. But So this is your results basically. And now comes the somewhat tricky part of taking those results and projecting them over the entire population. If you recall the idea behind stop it. It keeps asking me if I want to invite these people. All right, you take your sample. So you take your sample. In this case, we have the audit amount, $50, and the book amount. And you're going to project it over the population as a whole. Here's the whole population. So, you're going to take this and project it over the entire population. So you take a sample, we took 1,000 items. And so now we're going to say, okay, we're going to use these 1,000 items to project what we think the entire population should be worth. And this is true of all sampling. This isn't just for us. This is, one of the things that always comes up, the COVID thing, the vaccine for the COVID, they do a test sample on a number of people and say, okay, they can't take everyone in the world. There's 7 billion people in the world. They can't do that. So they take a few people, a relative few people, do the testing, and then project over the population. Okay, it's effective for this many people. We project it, based on these people, it's effective over the population of the entire population. And some of the things that they come into are simply statistical problems. And that there might be 50 things that they check for. People who have heart conditions, people who have this, that, age, all this kind of stuff. And as we know from testing, that a lot of times you get outliers. If you test at a 95% level, 5% of the time you're going to be wrong. So if you get enough things, something's going to be out of whack, and so you have to do more testing on it to see if it. But anyway, exactly the same idea though. You take a few people, give them the vaccine, see what happens, and then you say, okay, it worked for so this will be projected over the entire population. It's exactly the same thing we're doing, except ours isn't as important, but still. Okay, so these are the three ways that we projected over the entire population: mean per unit, ratio estimation, and difference estimation. And there's advantages and disadvantages of each of these, but then we'll talk about those in a little bit, but we'll just work out the numbers here for now. Okay, mean per unit. The mean, if you think about it, is just average, right? Okay, so we're the auditors, so whose average are we going to use? Our average or their average? The audit average or the book average? Anyone?
The audit average.
Yeah. We're going to take our results. Say, look at, we did we took our sample. We took a sample of 50 items. This is what we came up with, and we are going to project it over the entire population. Now, this is for a sample size of 1,000. We're going to project it over the total number of accounts receivable of 8,000. So coming down here, we'll take the times the audit average. And this will equal our projected value. So this is the value that we think that the entire population of accounts receivable is. Okay, so, and I thought I'd cleaned up the stuff on this. Obviously, I did not. Okay. Ghost. All right, so we'll take so 8,000. Equals our projected value. Time for Mr. Calculator. 8,000. $400,000. Okay. So this is our projected value, 400,000. This is what we think that the true value of the accounts receivable is. We think it's 400,000. So that's our projected value. Okay, now how much is the misstatement, and is it an overstatement or an understatement?
Would it be 20,000 understatement?
Yep. So we compare it to the total book value. I should probably get it a little closer. I'll do something. Okay, so total book value was 380. Yeah, make that red. And so this would be an understatement. Of 20,000. So this is and it's an understatement because we're saying that they should be 400,000. Their book value is 380,000. We're saying it should be 20,000 more. So they have an understated $20,000 on their books. And by the way, after this one, we'll get to the monetary unit sampling. And monetary unit sampling is only for overstatements. And normally you think of accounts receivable, you say, okay, well, accounts receivable, they're probably going to want to overstate it. Make it look like they're better. But for some companies, why would they want to understate their accounts receivable? Why would they want to make themselves look worse? Yep. Yeah. this in here somewhere. All right. Yeah, for taxes. I mean, so even though you normally think, okay, we're going to look and make sure they're not overstating their accounts receivable, they might be doing it the other way. You know, they don't want to pay the taxes, so maybe they're reducing the accounts receivable. And notice if they don't record sales on the books that they should, that's going to reduce their sales taxes that they owe the government, right? There's all kinds of things that could be, you know, reasons why they might want to understate their accounts receivable. So, you know, the nice thing about the classical sampling is that unlike the monetary unit sampling, you can find understatements with it. So that's kind of one of the beauties of this, is that, you know, whatever it comes out, and it could be an understatement, even when you at first might suspect that you'll be overstated. And, you know, if you did the same thing on probably proportional to size, you know, this might come out as being fine because it takes understatements and it ignores them. Okay, ratio estimation. Ratio estimation is probably the one that is the best if you have a bunch of different values in the accounts. And you take the ratio, and here's what ratio estimation is. They say, okay, there's a ratio of things that are off here. And what we mean by that is small things probably are off by small amounts, and larger things are probably off by larger amounts. Now, so if you have a $10 accounts receivable, it's probably not going to be off by $100. You know, be off by $2 or whatever it is, but probably not $100. Whereas if you have a $5,000 accounts receivable, being off by $100 would probably be, you know, not that uncommon. So the idea is that bigger things are off by bigger amounts and smaller things are off by smaller amounts. That's kind of what the ratio estimation one does. And if you forget which one goes on top, it goes alphabetically. I don't know why that is, but audit over book. There's actually tons of things in accounting with the ratio that are alphabetical for some reason. Audit average. $50. Book average was 48. So you're going to take these two and divide them. See my color coordination? Okay, so we're going to divide those. So, and we're going to multiply that times. You know, this is going to look funny. New plan. Okay, so we're going to take this times the total book value. Of 380. And this will equal our projected value. No. Projected value of some number. So 380. I do the averages first. So 50 divided by 48 times 380,000 equals $395 and scratch that, $395,000 and 808. I don't know. 395,833. See, I knew I could say it. So this will be our projected value. And what that is saying is really saying that large items are up by large amounts, small ones are up by smaller amounts. You know, that's the, we have this ratio. And the projected misstatement would be what's that, 19,000? No, 15,833. Yeah. And overstated or understated? What do you think? Just like the other one, understated. We think it should be higher than what they have. Okay, difference estimation. We'll do this one, then we'll take a break before we jump into the other one. And difference estimation is where you just take the difference between the two. Try to save time. I think I probably end up wasting time. So you take the audit average minus the book average. And you'll get a difference. Oh. So you get a difference of, in this case, was it $2? So the difference is $2 per accounts receivable. Okay, now let's think about this for a second. Are we saying that the book value is for each of these is understated or overstated? You guys are toying with me. You guys know this. Yep. Yeah, well, so what we're saying is that it's understated by $2. Now this method is a little bit different in that it gives you the projected misstatement first. So we're going to take our number of accounts receivable is 8,000. It doesn't look terrible. Let's do it this way. Uh, 16,000. All right, so this is actually the understatement. So what we're saying is that every single accounts receivable is understated by the difference of $2. So on this one, you actually back into the projected value. Now, if this is an understatement, you'd have to add it. All right, so this would be 396. So this one, you kind of back into it. You have to add that into to get this number. So it gives you the projected misstatement first, which is a little bit different than the other ones. And I tried. Okay, so that would be our, so that's classical sampling. So classical sampling, the nice thing about it is that it can do understatements or overstatements. And I have seen CPA questions that say, are the, which type of testing would you use? And, they'll have, mean per unit, monetary unit sampling, test of control, whatever, and they'll say that if you suspect an understatement. Okay, so So a nice thing about class setting, it can be used for overstatements and understatements. Used for either one of those. And that's probably the biggest advantage of them. You can easily increase the sample size. Those are probably the two biggest advantages of it. There's a few other things, but those are probably the biggest ones. Now, as far as which one should you use, if the items are all about the same value, the mean per unit's a good one. If the errors are likely to all be for one thing, if it's about the same amount, and so what I mean by that is difference estimation is if there is one thing, if there's a set amount that the books are that the items are off by, that are usually off by, or you find that errors because of this one thing. That's a good one to use that for the difference estimation. So for an example, let's say that there's a $20 handling charge for every single order. And sometimes that handling charge doesn't get put in. And it doesn't matter whether it's a $50 order or a $50,000 order, there's a $20 handling charge. That handling charge is a set amount. And if that's what the error is, that's a likely error. Doing the difference estimation is a good one to use because each one is possibly being up by a set amount. So that's not good. The one that's probably the most theoretically the best for most applications is going to be the ratio estimation. This one is probably the best for most because it can handle virtually anything. The other ones might be a little bit better in certain circumstances if they're all almost the same value, or if they're all off by almost the same value as those are too. But this one will handle just about anything. So whatever the reason, however big or small the accounts are, it doesn't matter. The ratio estimation one is a good one to use. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back and do the monetary unit sampling. But so let's see, be back at. Let's say, what is this? 7:15. Let's say 7:20. I guess I don't need to put PM in there, but although I do have a student that's taking a class from Thailand, and they're exactly 12 hours off. So we have a 6 o'clock at night class, and he has to join at 6 in the morning. It's supposed to be horrible. Time's the class at 6 in the morning. What? Okay, so I'll be back at 7:20, and we will do monetary unit sampling. And once we're done with this handout, that's going to be it. And then you guys go on break. Yay. Okay. See you in about 5 minutes. Oops. Okay. Monetary unit sampling, there's two things that a lot of times they will ask you about. One is sample size. How to pick the sample size, which a couple of quirky things about it that you'll notice. They don't actually give you the number of items in the sample. You know, this is what you need for the sample size. But you'll notice that it's not like up here, you know, where they give you the total accounts receivable and you multiply it out and blah, blah, blah. They don't tell you the number of items. So, you know, in that way, it's a little strange, except for, it's called monetary unit sampling. Actually, each dollar is a unit. So while it doesn't say how many items are in the sample, according to this method, each dollar is actually a unit. So if you think about it that way, that's kind of the reason why. Okay, let's go to the very end. We have our sample size calculation. I'm going to copy this and bring it up here. Okay, so our sample size, total population book value. Let's just say book value. I'm not sure why it doesn't, but so 500,000. Okay, so we have our total population for our book is 500,000. Times a reliability factor. Okay, so we're going to go down and see our reliability factors. Okay. The reliability factors. So we're going to do this for sample size. And they tell us that row 0 is used for sample size. And basic percent. I forgot to look and see what percentage we were doing. 10%. Sorry. Okay, so the reliability factor for our sample size is going to be 10% is 2.31. So we will go back up and put that in. So that takes care of the top part. Bottom part. Tolerable misstatement or performance materiality, same thing, 30,000. Minus. The expected misstatement is, oops, times an expansion factor. Okay, we gotta go back down here. Expansion factors are nice because you don't have to worry about what row you're on. It's only one number. So the expansion factor at 10% will be 1.5. Okay, now I'm going to tell you something else though about this. Occasionally, if the expected misstatement was 0, if this was 0, you wouldn't need the expansion factor. And I've seen on the exam questions sometimes where they don't have any, the expected misstatement is 0. And people start looking around for the expansion factor. You don't need it if there is no expected misstatement. So, you know, if this is 0, you don't need that number, right? Okay. All right, so this equals, let's do the math here. And on the bottom here, we have, I'm going to do this one first. So this is 1,200 times 1.5. 1,800. 28,200. Okay, so $40.95. 96. Round it out up to the nearest one. And the real formula is that you round it off to the nearest number. I would suggest you always round it up. But the true formula is that you round it to the nearest one. But I would say round it up, just because you don't have to go into court and say we rounded down and miss something or whatever. And you know, you're only talking about one item anyways, so I would encourage you okay, so that's the sample size. Now let's go to sample interval. So interval equals total book value, 500,000 Oops, that's not a dollar sign. Sample size is 41. Equals some number. $12,195.12. Okay, so that's that one. It's kind of like baking a cake. You know, they tell you go get this, go get that, and you put it together. And even though this looks kind of cumbersome, this is way quicker than finding it. Well, two ways it's way quicker than this way. To find the sample for classical sampling, you need to find the standard deviation. So for classical sampling, if you want to get the sample size, you need to get an estimate of standard deviation. So you need to do a pre-sample, go pick a bunch of items and do a pre-sample. Or if you did the audit last year, you can use that. So, you know, part of the problem of getting a sample size for the classical sampling is that you have to have the standard deviation or an estimate of it. Also, once you get that, now you got to go pick your items and you got to go pick them randomly. Probably proportional size. If you recall, you know, whichever item crosses that interval is picked, it also picks your sample for you. So not only does it get you your sample size, taking the interval, it'll pick your sample for you. You don't have to worry about a random number table and which table did you use, what was the starting point, none of that. Whatever one crosses the intervals when you pick. So quickly pick find the sample size, quickly pick the sample. Don't have to worry about it being the random number tables and all that kind of stuff. Oops, yeah, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. All right, now for the one that's a big headache. This one. How bad can things get? So the sample size, and then this one is, okay, you've taken your sample, how bad can things get? All right. Now, these are the items that were found with misstatements in the accounts receivable sample. Okay, so however many, well, you can find out how many items they took. You take 400,000 divided by 5, whatever that is. What is that? 80. Okay, so anyway, so out of the 80 items, we found these 3 things that were had misstatements. So the question is, what do you do with them? Now, this first one is unusual. Why? Let me put numbers by these. Ooh. Ah. I'm messing up. Okay. Yep. Yeah, the problem with this first one, let me go and put numbers here. So I should have done this before I sent this out. But okay. Oh no, these are all off, huh? Let me just rewrite the whole thing right in front of you. Okay, yeah, so here's the problem with this one. You'll notice that this is an understatement. You know, the audit value is more than the book value. This method is not supposed to catch those. And when it does catch it, it ignores them. So in this case, there would be no problem. The projected value of that interval is 5,000. And more importantly, the projected misstatement is 0. So there actually is no misstatement. Now, like most auditors, when you look into this, say, well, wait a minute, this is there's a problem here. This is wrong. Not with this method. With this method, you ignore it. And is it included in the incremental allowance? No, and it wouldn't matter if it was, because 0 times anything will be 0. So there's no mistake. So this one's fine. So this first one is not a problem. Okay, next one. This is an overstatement, right? So we're okay. So this is what this is what this method looks for, is overstatement. So this is an overstatement. That's fine. The book value is not more than the interval. So this will be just your normal. Okay, so trying to divide by 200 times 5,000. What does that equal? So 20 divided by 200. All right, so 500. And so the projected misstatement is the rest of it. 4,500. Okay, so this is off by 4,500. Now, you'll notice that there's only 200 in here versus 5,000. So there still could be more things wrong in an interval. And furthermore, because you did find a misstatement, it makes it more likely that there will be more misstatements. So will this be including incremental allowance? Yes. Because there's a possibility in that interval that there could be more things that are wrong. Okay, so this is what you kind of think of as a normal one. This would be with the normal one. This one is a little bit crazy too. What's wrong with number 3? I should say what's wrong with it, but what's unusual about number 3? Number 3 is a special one. Why?
Book value is more than the audit value.
Yep, right here. And this is more than that. So it covers the entire interval. Now, when that happens, what we're actually going to do is look for the actual misstatement. So what is this account actually misstated by? Uh, 5,500. Oops, that's not a 5. So this will be our misstatement. And you really don't need to put this in here. You just get the projected value to get that. If you wanted to clean it up a little bit, you could put this as 4,000, but you really don't need to put that in. This is the misstatements are really what we're looking for. And again, this one, even though we look at it for our rejected misstatement, this one is an actual misstatement. This is really an actual misstatement. We're going to include it with a rejected misstatement along with the other ones, but that's an actual misstatement. And, for any item in the sample, for instance, this one, the actual misstatement is really only $180. This one's only off by $180. That's the actual. It gets projected to be $4,500, but the actual amount that this is only off is 180. Whereas this one, the actual amount is off by 1,000. We're going to use that 1,000. Why? It covers the entire interval. And nothing else could go wrong in that interval. It's completely covered by this book value item. And by the way, this is one of the really great things about this method. What were the chances of this one, of number 3, being picked? It's 100%. Right. If the item, if the book value of the item is higher than the interval, it's 100% that it's going to get picked. So if you have someone who's trying to cook the books and increase the accounts receivable to try to make themselves look more profitable, at some point, if they increase an account, like that one should have been 4,500, and they bumped it up to 5,500. By bumping up to 5,500, they guaranteed it was going to get picked. If they left it alone, it may not have been picked. But once you bump it up over the interval, it's 100% guaranteed to get picked. And even if they take it and say, okay, well, I know, we'll spread it out over a bunch of other accounts, we'll just add a few dollars to a whole bunch of accounts. This method will probably catch it, because that'll probably cause some of those to be picked that normally wouldn't have. So the real beauty behind probably monetary unit sampling, the real beauty is the more a company, more aggressively they try to create a fraud to overstate something, the more and more likely that it'll be caught. And at some point, it becomes 100% that it'll be caught. So that's really one of the main advantages of this method, is that it's made for auditing. It's made for what happens when now it doesn't work on understatements. If someone puts an account for 0 on the books, there's no chance it'll be caught. So accounts payable, things like that, if they don't record them, it's not going to help in those situations. But when the situation is that it's possibly overstated, or even likely overstated, this method is the one to use because it'll catch it. And the more they cook the books, the more likely it's going to get caught. Okay. So predictive misstatement is just all these. Taking this out. It looks confusing. So all these predictive misstatements together. Oh, I know I can do it. Can you guys hear that dog? I'm in the basement. There's a dog just tearing around up above my head. The little dog bothers everything. We have a turtle, except for we have a Russian tortoise. Except for the Russian tortoise, it doesn't bother the Russian tortoise. I don't know why. Probably afraid he'll get bit or something. But Russian tortoise, it doesn't bother. Okay. So, and this is our best estimate as far as what the books are off by. So our best estimate is that these are off by 5,500. However, again, this is a sample. Because it's a sample, it might be off by more. All right, so, So the first thing we're going to look at is the basic precision, and this is if there were no errors, we didn't find any problems. There's still a possibility that it could be off. I'm just going to copy this. Okay. So it equals our interval, which is 5,000. Times our reliability factor, and this is at 10%. So we need a reliability factor at 10%. Down here. Okay, row 0 is used for basic precision. Well, sample size and basic precision. We're doing basic precision. We use a 0 row. Why? Because this is if there are 0 misstatements. This is what it could still be off by. So we're going to go to 10%, 2.31. So that's what we're going to multiply our 5,000 by. Equals some number. $11,550. Okay. And now for the worst, the worst of this method. And someday I'm going to make an incremental table. Okay. So we have to find the reliability increments times the misstatements, largest first. Now we only have one that we're going to need for it, the table, and that's this one. These other two, well, this one's not a misstatement at all, and this one is not incremental. It covers the entire interval. So that's the only one that we need to worry about. But let's look at the so going down here, we're going to say, okay, so this is kind of the increment we were talking about. Maybe I'll do it in, let's do it in red. So here's what the increment is. They say, okay, this goes up by some increment. You know, it increases when you go from a number of misstatements or overstatement from 2.31 to 3.89. So this is what we use in our formula. So 3.89 minus okay, so 3.89 minus 2.31 minus 1. Everyone what the 1 is, I imagine it's degrees of freedom, but quite honestly, I'm not sure. Usually you see minus 1s as degrees of freedom. Okay, so 3.89 minus 0.58. So this is our reliability factor increment. Is that? Oh, let's make that. We make it blue. And now we're going to multiply that by the misstatement. So this will be this. Misstatements, they go largest first, but it doesn't matter for us because we only have one that's going to, oops, went right past it. We only have one that's going to be in there. That's the 4,500. So 0.58 times 4,500. 2,610. And here's the idea behind this, which kind of makes sense. I'm gonna take these out. We don't need it. There aren't any other overstatements. There's only one. The idea is if you have misstatements, that it's not just that you have misstatements, it's the dollar amounts. So the larger the dollar amounts, you know, the larger the dollar amounts that got by, the larger it could be off by, the more they could be off by. You know, if this is off by $45, it's different than being off by $4,500. So the more that something is off, the more likely there's a larger misstatement. Okay, so we just take these first three. And let me clean these up a little bit. So these three together will give us this. All right, 26 plus. $19,660. And so this is the number that the financial statements could be off, given the information we have. So this is our best estimate. And this is what we call the upper limit. So we think it's going to be off by this amount. However, it could be off by up to that amount. And so this would so this is what it's kind of saying here. I'm going to grab these before I click off this page. Okay, so they give us a book value of okay, so a good ruler. Okay, so this is sort of like what it's what this is kind of telling us. So 400,000, what they think it is. We're saying that, okay, our projected misstatement is 5,500. So this is an overstatement of 5,500. But it's sort of like, if you think about it, it's almost like the curve here. We also have our basic precision and our incremental. Could have done that better. But anyway, so it's possible that it could be off by a total of that. So our best estimate is that it's off by 5,500. However, it could be off by as much as 19,660. So this 400,000 could be off by up to whatever that is. $440? No, $340. It's getting too late. Yeah, so we're saying that this, it could be as low as that. So, would you accept it? Well, it depends if 19,660 is your tolerable misstatement. If that's okay, then you say, yeah, you accept it. If it's not okay, then you won't. So this is kind of what it's telling you, that our best estimate is right here. This is what we think it is. If you had to guess at what this is off by, or not guess, but estimate what it's off by, this is the best estimate. However, it's 5,500. However, it could be off by up to 19,600. It could be as low as 380,340. So this is so this is really the one that we're, that you come up with this and say, okay, well, this is what you'd compare to. Misstatement, sometimes called performance materiality, same thing. And by the way, performance materiality is kind of the newer term. I'm not sure how they're going to incorporate that. It seems like they still use tolerable misstatement for the statistics stuff, but performance materiality when they're actually divvying up the materiality. So I'm not sure that they're interchangeable though. They mean exactly the same thing. How much are you willing to let that account? What's materiality for that account? And those are both the same thing. Questions? Okay. Well, okay, so what I'm going to do is when we go off the air here, I will send out the exam. It's due in 2 weeks. It'll be due on the 22nd. And there's nothing else to do. So enjoy your spring break. And well, first of all, do you have any questions on any of this?
Well, we have to turn this in.
Yes.
Okay. Are you going to open it up tonight for us?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, the practice exam will be, there'll be a place for that to be uploaded. And also I'll upload a place to put the exam itself. So yeah, they'll both be there. And I promise I won't put it in a different class. So anyway, yeah, so the practice exam that we just did, you get credit for that. And then also the exam itself, and that's it. And I'll see you guys.
And I think you opened the Anthony case for us to turn in as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, let me check and make sure.
Yeah, you did. It's on there.
It's on there.
Yeah. That one's due April 15.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you get that in, that's not. I could change that to 22nd also. There's no rush on and actually this is kind of important for you guys. If you are missing stuff, just turn it in. I don't take off points. It won't be in your grade until you turn it in. But turn it in. There's no reason not to turn it in. It isn't like, oh, I'm only gonna get 20% of it or whatever. You get 100% of whatever you turn in. Now, if you score 20%, that's what you're gonna get. But yeah, so turn it in. And I think yeah, that's it.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Okay, have a good break. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Enjoy your break.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.